Previously, we've looked at building tables inside of HTML. But as you can see, there's a lot of information here which is kind of not that great, and we might want to kind of just adjust to make reading this table a lot easier. Because as it is, if I try to scroll across and look down a column, I have a hard time trying to match up that information. So we're just going to focus real quickly on how we can fix this. I'm going to go into my CSS, and here I'm going to create a table selector. And I'm simply going to apply a border. And just to start off, I'm going to show you a 1 pixel solid border, just so you can kind of see what effect that's going to have. When I reload, notice that it just puts a border around the table, not in the individual cells and things like that. So we're going to go back, and I'm going to apply multiple selectors to this same rule. That's going to be TD and TH. So now we have a border for all of those. When I reload this, you'll notice that now I see individual boxes. They're just 1 pixel wide solid borders, but I can start to see where each data cell is and how that works. Because that really helps in a lot of ways. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I can now see what data belongs in what cell. Now, I also notice that, for example, my text is real close to those individual cells, and that might cause some issue. So in my TD and TH cells, I'm going to create a new selector. It's just for those. I'm going to put a padding of 5 pixels. Remember, padding is in between the content and the border. So when I reload, you'll notice that now my table's a little bit bigger, and I can easily see my text. You can see that the table headers are centered in the columns, and that the table data is left justified by default. Of course, we could change the text alignment by either use a CSS rule either on the table data and table header cells, or by applying a certain class if we needed to. We're not going to at this point though, so don't worry about that. When I look at this, I see a few other things I can do though to make my life a little bit easier. And one of the things I want to do really is apply a background color to my table header cells just so they stand out a little bit. So I'll make a new selector for a new set of rules, and this is just going to be for my table header. And I'll say background color, and I'll give it an antique white, just simply because that kind of fits in with the style of this web page. When I reload, you can now see how it stands out, and it makes life just a little bit easier. Now I can take kind of my finger and visually kind of move across the 11 a.m. and down Wednesday and see, oh, I have class. Or if I go to Thursday, I can see that I have office hours. This still, however, isn't quite perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up and I'm going to create a new selector for my table. So you notice in some cases I have multiple selectors. They're separated by commas. And that's where I want to share those rules amongst multiple selectors and multiple HTML elements. When I have something that's specific or is going to be able to be inherited, I can simply put it on like table. In this case, I'm going to do border, collapse, and I'm going to choose collapse. Now when I reload, notice that the space in between my cells goes away. Notice that now I have simpler lines, so I don't have as many lines. And this makes it a whole lot easier to read that information. And I personally prefer this. I have my headers, which stand out and lets me see information. I have single lines, which makes it even easier. And I really like this. I might go and kind of tweak this just a little bit more since I'm on table. I might do my margin and set it to auto. And I'm also going to set the max width to be 100%. And that's just going to keep me from growing outside of any containing element. Now with the margin auto, notice that it centers my table. So that looks a little bit nicer in most circumstances. And I've protected myself in case my content gets too big. So this is just a couple of basic things that we can do. Now, the last thing that I want to do is show you how we can apply what they sometimes refer to as zebra striping. And zebra striping is simply the process of alternating colors on our background rows. And what I could do is do something like, for example, .odd. And if it's odd, I could set a background color. And then I want it to be almost white. So I'll pick something like pound EEE, which is a very, very light shade. Of course, I'm going to have to come in to my table then and set my odd rows. And I can say, okay, there's class odd there. Then I'm going to copy it, and every other row, I'll put this in. When I reload it, you can see how it's just a little bit off and a little bit different. And you might say, oh, it needs to be a little bit more. And I can easily come in here and make that change inside my CSS. Just so it stands out just a little bit different. And maybe that's not the right way I want to do it. Maybe I want to alternate it completely and say, no, I want it very dark. And then I'm going to choose a color. For example, that's going to be stark contrast like white. And I can do things very different if I need to. Of course, this has some other issues that we have to work around, we have to think about. So I'm looking at this, I'm going, well, you know, I don't like having to put the odd on it. Is there a better way? And yeah, there is. I'm going to set this once again back to a lighter color real quick. And I'm going to come in here to my table and remove odd. So anytime I have a table row that had a class odd, I'm just going to remove it real quick just so you can kind of see what this is like. So instead of using an odd selector, so what we want to do is we want to specify the table rows that are the odd rows or the even, but only those within inside of our T body. Okay, we don't want the rows up in our T header. So I'm going to say T body. And so I TR. But if I did this, this would give me every table row. So I'm going to choose a pseudo class, and that's going to be the nth-child. You might say, well, how does nth-child works? Well, I can specify a certain one. So if I specify, for example, 1. If I come here, you'll notice that the very first row is selected, but not rows 3, 4, and 5. I could select 3, and that would give me my third row. But that seems to be a bit redundant. But that's going to be limiting because I have to know how many rows my table is and different things like that. So instead, there's a built-in selection for odd. And if I do that, notice that every odd row is selected. Or I could choose even rows as well. And so this lets me easily see, I can easily move across. I don't have to take my finger and kind of go across it. I can now look, and that's the advantage of using something like zebra striping. Now, this is a very obvious color that I've picked, and I might want to pick a slightly different color, but this is a good example of what we're looking for when we're trying to create a slightly different style that will help us. And that's the whole idea behind zebra striping. Of course, we do have some other options we can probably look at. For example, my caption is a little on the small side. So let's go ahead and fix that real quickly. And I'm going to do table caption. The reason I'm doing that is I'm looking for the captions that are inside of a table. I can have captions other places. So in this case, I'm going to choose my font size to be much larger. So I'm going to say 2rem, which is approximately 200% the size of a normal element. So we'll do that, and then we'll do font family and I'm going to specify a slightly different font family. And then I'll also choose a font weight of bold. Now when I reload my page, you can see that my caption is much larger. It clearly defines what this table is about, and I can see that. If I have a screen reader, because, for example, I'm visually impaired, and so I'm needing to use an assistive tool in order to help me navigate a computer and navigate the web, this is going to make it work a lot easier, because they're looking for things like those captions and other elements that you might find. So this is all working. It's very effective for me, and it creates something that's a little bit more attractive and usable for all my users.